Welcome to the Discretionary Award Process Multi-Year Discretionary Contracts webinar. My name is Noah Rose, an Assistant Director in Learning and Development at the New York City Mayor's Office of Contract Services, MOCS. It is a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. In today's training, we will do the following. Reinforce understanding of the City Council Discretionary Award process and gain a deeper understanding of the multi-year reform. Become more proficient in navigating Passport with regards to processing multi-year contracts and budgets. Establish tools and best practices that will lead to timely budgeting and invoicing. Today we have from MOCS's Office of Nonprofit Initiatives, Gabby Katz and Jessica Chung. Team, take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our training webinar for multi-year discretionary contracts. My name is Gabby, and as Noah mentioned, we will be presenting on behalf of MOCS's Nonprofit Initiatives team. Thank you for joining us today, and let's get started. In today's agenda, we will be covering a little bit about our agency MOCS, a general overview of the discretionary application and process, the multi-year discretionary reform, contracting tasks, financial tasks, and end with links to our resources. To begin, let us introduce ourselves. The Mayor's Office of Contract Services, also known as MOCS, leads procurement for New York City. We serve as an oversight and service agency dedicated to making it easier for vendors to do business with the city. Now, we will provide a comprehensive overview of discretionary funding, from the basics and eligibility to best practices and everything in between. The first step of the discretionary process is applying for discretionary funding. Organizations that wish to receive discretionary funding must apply via the City Council application and must continue to submit an application to City Council each year that they wish to receive funds. The application can be found on City Council's website, and it opens annually in January for approximately 6 weeks. This is a non-competitive process, and this funding is only available to nonprofits. Additionally, awards are made for a single fiscal year. If an organization has submitted their City Council discretionary funding application by the established deadline, their application will be reviewed by City Council for award clearance and designation. City Council will review applications through their internal vetting process, which is outlined in the Discretionary Funding Policies and Procedures Guide. This guide also includes a glossary of terms such as Schedule C and transparency resolutions. For any questions concerning the application and City Council clearance status, please contact the City Council Discretionary Unit at discretionary@council.nyc.gov. Once City Council has reviewed and approved provider applications, the adopted Budget Schedule C is released. This outlines the discretionary funds and allocations for the new fiscal year. Council will then process and clear the awardees with each transparency resolution and share this with MOCS to check for procedural requirements. Transparency resolutions have data on new designations made later in the fiscal year, as well as any amount changes or scheduled reallocations. Please note that some changes like agency transfers are effectuated through budget modifications, which occur less frequently. After MOCS checks the procedural requirements, we will share out the cleared list showing which providers and awards are cleared for funding. We will then share the MRA tracker for any amount updates to multi-year contract shells and upload new contracts to Passport. From here, the agency is able to initiate the contract workflow and work toward registering the contract. As a note for multi-year discretionary contracts, you will only need to initiate and complete contracting tasks in year 1. This process of exchanging data and issuing cleared lists repeats every 4 to 6 weeks as Council sends out new data. I will now pass it over to Jessica to review the procedural requirements for award clearance. Over to you, Jessica.
Great, thank you, Gabby. As mentioned, we will be reviewing the procedural requirements which are needed for an award to clear and to begin contracting. The first of the procedural requirements is City Council clearance, which we have just reviewed. For awards marked as pending City Council clearance, please advise providers to reach out to the City Council Discretionary Unit at the email provided. Agency leads may reach out to their unit leads or City Council Finance Analyst for questions. This contact is listed on your agency's designation sheet sent from Council Finance. Additional contact information can be found on Bywise. Next, providers will need to submit an HHS pre-qualification application and passport. To do this, the provider will also need to create a passport account. And finally, providers must complete the capacity building training in Matrix, an online training platform for award clearance. Now, let's take some time to review the HHS application requirement. Providers can complete the HHS pre-qualification application and passport. For most providers, this will expire annually due to the New York State Charities Bureau filing. Providers will need to update their filings before completing and/or updating the PQL application to retain their approved status. Next, we'll go over how you can check the application status directly in Passport. There are two ways for you to do this. First, in Passport, you will navigate to the Sourcing tab and click Browse Pre-Qualified Lists. Then, search for and select HHS Accelerator Pre-Qualification. And then you can use the search bar to search for providers. Vendors who have fulfilled the HHS pre-qualification requirement will have a current status of approved. Providers should also receive an email from Passport when their documents have been approved or are near expiration. Alternatively, you can view a provider's PQL status in their vendor profile. In the Activity tab, under the Pre-Qualified List Qualification section, you can view existing applications along with their current status. This is a good place to check if a provider is waiting for the tracker to be updated, but wants to know the current status. Next, we will briefly review the capacity building training requirement. Completion is tracked through an organization's EIN, so providers should make sure this field is accurate when creating their matrix profile. While a certificate of completion lasts for 3 years, the training may need to be completed again if the individual who completed it leaves the organization. Agencies should confirm that training is completed by a principal officer or board member of the funded organization. Now that we've covered the procedural requirements, let's move on to the discretionary award tracker and the clear list. Agencies and providers can check the status of their discretionary awards through the discretionary award tracker online. Simply enter the provider's name or EIN in the search bar and hit search. This tracker is updated approximately every 6 weeks as MOX receives data from City Council Finance after City Council has voted on transparency resolutions. The date of the last update can be found above the search bar. The site also houses helpful links such as a discretionary checklist and a guide to better understanding New York City Council discretionary funding. After searching for your vendor, you will see their designated awards listed along with the status as shown here. If an award is cleared, the status will say cleared. Otherwise, it will list the outstanding requirements. For example, this provider needs to submit their HHS pre-qualification application, create a passport account, complete capacity building training, and is pending City Council clearance. Details and next steps for each outstanding requirement can be found further down on the page. The discretionary tracker site is updated using the tracker file that MOX shares with agencies. This file will show all designated awards along with their status on the date listed. Please note that awards from the same provider can have different statuses depending on the time of designation and data check. Along with the tracker, MOX shares out the cleared list, which is a spreadsheet of cleared awards at the date listed. Great. Now we move on to a more recent change, the multi-year discretionary reform and its effect on contracting. As you are all aware, the multi-year discretionary reform took effect in July of 2023. This reform impacts all discretionary award contracts as of fiscal year 24 and allows providers to enter one contract per human service agency for a contract term of 3 years. There are many benefits to this new structure as it eliminates the need for contracting in the out years if the provider continues to receive City Council awards. This reform also offers immediate budgeting upon award clearance in the contract out years and facilitates timely invoicing for payment. With regards to contract details, the total contract value will reflect a maximum reimbursable amount, MRA. This is not a guaranteed amount, but a projected value based on cleared awards from the previous fiscal year and includes a funding buffer should Council designate additional awards. It is important to note that the buffer amount is not invoiceable. Agencies should only review budgets and invoices for cleared awards. Again, please note that City Council discretionary funding is not guaranteed, and organizations must still meet the requirements to obtain funding. Namely, the procedural requirements must be completed, and City Council discretionary funding applications are required for each year. Now for a little tip. While discretionary awards still need to meet the procedural requirements we reviewed earlier, agencies may, at their discretion, choose to initiate contracts for providers pending HHS PQL and/or capacity building training to facilitate the vendor document submission task. However, you should only do this if the award has been cleared by City Council. These providers will still need to fulfill the outstanding requirements before submitting the contract for registration. This tip only exists to provide agencies with more time to collect contract documents. Additionally, agencies should only request documentation for the current fiscal year. More details and best practices on the multi-year reform can be found on Bywise in the agency FAQ. This document covers topics such as award clearance and uploads, documentation, budgeting and invoicing, as well as out-year specific actions. We are continuously updating the FAQs for this reform, so if you have any additional questions, please feel free to share them with the MPO team, and we will review them for the next update. Along with the new reform, we've added a new document for reference, the MRA tracker. As new awards clear, MOCS will update the MRA tracker to reflect cumulative amounts and ensure the current contract total covers the total cleared award amount. After each cleared list, MOCS will send the updated MRA tracker to discretionary leads to review and update contract amounts as needed. Walking through the MRA tracker, contracts are bundled by provider and agency. In the FY24 tab, we can see the FY24 award IDs, cleared amount, and contract description. The tab name denotes the first year of the multi-year award. We can also see any FY25 awards for this provider noted in columns E through G. The cleared bundle description shown here and in the cleared list will show the bundled purpose of funds, but Passport will show a general multi-year discretionary award description. Then we have the contract identifiers. The MOCS unique contract ID is for internal tracking to ensure that only one contract bundle exists for providers per agency division. Next is the unique ID, EPIN, whether this is a new provider, and the upload date. FY23 providers with cleared awards noted as a previous provider will have original MRAs based on their FY23 bundle. New category providers will have their MRA based off the year one cleared amount. If a provider has a bundle on the FY25 sheet, that means they are a new provider and do not have any FY24 awards. Then we have the MRA amount, which will be 3.75 times the cleared award amount per guidance shared earlier. Next, we will review how your agency may track and request updates to the MRA based on the tracker. To request updates, agency leads must reply to the MRA tracker email confirming the changes they wish to make. Updates in year one are not necessary unless the total value of cleared awards exceeds the MRA value. Should the total cleared value exceed the MRA, your agency will need to process an amendment post-registration to reflect the additional cleared amount. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the MOCS NPO team. Now, back to the spreadsheet. Here, the MRA exceeded column checks whether the cleared amount thus far exceeds the MRA. Since we are in year two, column N now checks if the cleared amount is above 66% of MRA instead of 33%. If yes, column O shows by how much. Column P then suggests a new MRA value. MOCs will wait for agency confirmation before updating these amounts and mark awards as pending agency confirmation in column Q for agency review. We have also added a separate FY25 tracking sheet for new awardees where the first year is FY25. These contracts will run from FY25 through FY27. Since they are in year 1, this sheet will only contain columns related to FY25 awards, and columns N through P will check for 33% of the MRA. Finally, we have additional identifiers for the provider, including the vendor EIN, legal name of the organization, award fiscal year, and agency code. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Gabby, who will provide an overview of the contracting tasks in Passport.
Thanks, Jessica. With multi-year discretionary contracts fully underway, let's look at the contracting tasks providers and agencies will be asked to complete in Passport for a multi-year contract. Once an award has cleared, agencies may move on to contracting tasks to get the contract registered. After award clearance, agency users will need to initiate the contract to begin the registration process. The contracting workflow is made up of multiple tasks that run parallel to one another, including vendor document request and approval, certification of funds, and public hearing. Some tasks, namely the purchase order, responsibility determination, and authoring, necessitate their own workflows. Note, agencies cannot change the contract amount after e-signature. If an MRA update is beneficial, your agency should evaluate at the beginning of the contracting workflow or process an amendment after registration. Now we will review budgeting tasks by case scenario. As a reminder, remember that only financial contributors, financial managers, and the CFO can allocate the certification of funds, and only budget preparers and budget managers can create a budget. The global profile refers to a system user's overall Passport access and user role. It defines the types of actions a user can perform in Passport. Global profiles are provisioned by MOCs when a user is given access to Passport. The local profile, in contrast, refers to a project-specific team role given to a system user by a colleague. Local users can only complete tasks within their specified record. Now, a brief review of budgeting. Discretionary contracts are by nature retroactive. And after completing contracting tasks, you will need to launch a purchase order and create a budget. When launching a PO, you can only launch a PO for the current fiscal year. For example, for a fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 26 discretionary contract, to register it this year, you would launch a fiscal year 25 PO before submitting the contract for registration. Once July 1st passes, that PO would become active, at which point you can launch a PO for the previous fiscal year 24. The PO houses the budget for a fiscal year, and one is needed for each year. In the case of retroactive contracts, where services were rendered in previous years prior to the contract registration, the agency will need to initiate a purchase order change request, or POCR. This step ensures that the allocated fiscal year budget is directed to the provider. To budget for a new contract, agencies first must complete the certification of funds and then approve them. Then you may launch the purchase order for the current fiscal year. The PO will switch to active status on July 1st. Once active, it can be invoiced against. Once the PO has been launched, the budget and encumbrance workflows should be completed for the cleared award amounts before the contract registration package is compiled and submitted to the comptroller. So how do we use the certification of funds to allocate across the contract term for a new multi-year contract? As the fiscal year amounts are based on prior year cleared awards, we recommend that agencies allocate equally amongst the 3 fiscal years, especially for agencies that see a high volume of reso activity. In Passport, if utilizing allocation by percentage, agencies may input 33.33% in years 1 and 2 and 33.34% in year 3. Alternatively, agencies also have the option to allocate only for the cleared amount in years 1 and 2 and subsequently push all of the buffer amount to year 3. In this example, we are looking at a multi-year contract with a value of $112,500. The discretionary provider's total cleared amount for fiscal year 24 with this agency was $30,000. However, so far, this agency has only encumbered for $21,000 of the total cleared amount. As we will discuss later, agencies must encumber fully before invoicing. We can see that the agency has decided to go with choice 1 and allocate the buffer equally amongst the 3 fiscal years. As a result, the combined total of the cleared amount and buffer for each fiscal year comes out to $37,500. After completing the certification of funds, agencies will need to launch the current year purchase order. A pro tip to speed up registration and avoid delays in processing advances is to click Exclude Vendor from the budget and submit a one-line budget in its place. The Exclude Vendor button can be found under the Vendor Files section in any POCR and New POs. After the contract is registered, you or the provider can then submit a POCR to amend the budget. Please note this method will not have the duplicate lines from previous fiscal year button. When completing and launching a purchase order, it is important to appropriately label the buffer amount as either buffer, allowance, or unallocated under the item category field. In this example, a discretionary provider has a total cleared amount of $10,000 for fiscal year 24. The agency has chosen to allocate the buffer equally amongst the 3 fiscal years, so their fiscal year budget is $12,500 with the 25% buffer. This agency has encumbered the total cleared amount of $10,000 and left $2,500 buffer remaining. When categorizing the buffer, notice the item category is set to allowance and it is not marked invoiceable. This buffer has now been correctly accounted for. Here are some best practices when it comes to encumbrance. Agencies should encumber for the total amount of cleared awards at the time of purchase order launch. If agencies cannot encumber the full amount, you can submit a partial encumbrance memo to the comptroller along with reasoning. However, you must encumber the full amount prior to invoicing. If the award value surpasses the budget amount, you may reallocate funding from the out years by initiating an FCCR and then encumbering more through a POCR. So, for example, if a provider has fiscal year 24 cleared awards totaling $20,000, at the time of purchase order launch under a fiscal year 24 budget of $30,000, the agency should only encumber $20,000. Should the provider later receive $5,000, the agency can then encumber additional funds through a POCR. Once all contracting tasks and pre-registration budgeting has been completed and shared with the comptroller, a discretionary contract can be registered. Yay! Now, you may focus on post-registration contract management. Especially for multi-year discretionary contracts, this step will be the most important in the out years of the contract term. Let's first talk about encumbrance and budgeting in the out years. In lieu of contract registration, providers will complete budget actions for awards in the out years. Additionally, separate scopes are not required in years 2 and 3. Agencies should continue to ensure continuation of insurance and collect the necessary backup documents for budgeting and invoicing reviews. Since we are in fiscal year 25, if your agency has a multi-year discretionary with the contract term July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2026, then you are now in the second year of the contract. During this time, agencies should receive and review the cleared list, launch the current year purchase order, keeping in mind that agencies will still need to launch an RQC1 and PO for fiscal year 25, launch a retroactive purchase order if necessary, and then complete the encumbrance workflows for cleared awards before issuing advances and/or working on the budget if need be. Here, we will review 3 different scenarios that you as agencies may encounter when budgeting in the out years of a multi-year discretionary contract. Case 1, launching budgets for retroactive years. Case 2, budgeting and encumbering for additional clearances, and Case 3, budgeting and encumbering for additional clearances when the initial allocation was insufficient. Again, please note that all of these cases are retroactive. In Case 1, we will look at an example of how to launch a budget for retroactive years when a multi-year discretionary contract has been registered in its second or third year. In this instance, a multi-year discretionary contract has been registered in the second fiscal year of its contract term, fiscal year 25. As previously mentioned, this means that during the contracting stage, the agency must first launch a PO for the current fiscal year before it can launch a retroactive PO for the previous fiscal year. As we can see in this image, the agency has launched their PO for fiscal year 25 and now must do so for fiscal year 24. In this example, we can also see that the agency has placed the full buffer amount in the outmost year of the contract, fiscal year 26. Now on to case number 2. Let's say that late in the first fiscal year of a multi-year contract term, City Council designates an additional fiscal year 24 award of $20,000 to a provider whose initial cleared amount was $100,000. The agency originally budgeted so that the 25% buffer amount was uninvoiceable. However, because this additional award clearance brings the total value of designated funds over the encumbered amount, the agency should utilize that buffer amount to accommodate for the growth in funds. To do this, the agency will have to process a POCR to make the uninvoiceable buffer funds available. Once completed, the provider will be able to invoice for the additional award. Now let's look at Case 3. This scenario is similar to Case 2, but with the catch of insufficient allocation. Here we can see the certification of funds for a registered multi-year discretionary contract. Currently, the total encumbered amount is $5,000. This was the total value of the provider's cleared awards at the time of the purchase order launch in fiscal year 24. We can also see that the agency allocated the funds to have the full buffer amount in fiscal year 26, rather than allocating equally amongst the 3 fiscal years. However, let's say that a few months ago, after Schedule C was released for fiscal year 25, this provider was designated $6,000 in award funds rather than $5,000. Once these funds have received clearance, the agency will have to modify the budget and reallocate accordingly. They would do this by first initiating an FCCR to move some or all of the buffer amount from fiscal year 26 to fiscal year 25, and then encumber more funds via a POCR, like we saw in Case 2. Finally, once budgeting is set up, providers can invoice against their contracts to receive payment. As we can see here, we have finally made it to the end of the discretionary timeline. So first, let's review the users involved in invoicing. Agencies must have at least one level of invoice approval, with the maximum being 4 levels. Users with the invoice approver role review and approve the invoice, but only invoice level 1 approvers can return an invoice to the provider, while users with the payment request approver role review the payment. Now, discretionary awards are based on a reimbursement model, meaning that organizations must invoice against their approved budget to receive the funds. This means only invoicing for cleared discretionary awards. Additionally, invoice services must match the fiscal year of the designated awards. Again, agencies must have between 1 to 4 levels of invoice approval. Once a provider submits an invoice, invoice approvers can review them for approval. During this review, agencies should make sure providers are only invoicing against the cleared award amount and check that the service dates of invoices match the fiscal year budget. For example, services conducted in the fiscal year 24 term must be invoiced against the fiscal year 24 budget. Afterwards, the payment request approver will review the payment. If there are any issues, they may reject the payment to return it to the invoice approver levels, who can then return the invoice to providers for edits. Otherwise, agencies can approve the invoices and providers will be sent their payment through PIP or FMS within 2 weeks of approval. And that's it. That's the end of the discretionary contracting process. Congratulations on sticking with us to the end. We hope you have learned more about how to navigate the multi-year discretionary contracting process and will be able to better assist providers in doing so as well. I'll hand it off to Jessica to close us out.
Thank you, Gabby. As we come to the end of our presentation, let's discuss some resources that we encourage agencies to utilize when completing the discretionary award process. First, we'll take a look at the MOCS website. The MOCS website offers public-facing information on passport, procurement, and nonprofit contracting. By clicking on Opportunities and then Nonprofits, you will be able to view various web pages and resources that cover everything from the capacity building training to the discretionary award tracker and even the returnable grant fund. Specifically, the Discretionary Award Process tab provides a comprehensive overview of the discretionary funding timeline, basics, and recent reforms such as the Multi-Year Discretionary Contract Reform and Financials Migration to Passport. The Learn Passport tab is a great place for details on how to access Passport as a provider, see available trainings, and approved guidance on completing financial tasks. To visit this webpage, go to nyc.gov/passport and select Learn Passport from the menu across the top. Clicking on Passport FAQs in the left navigation menu will bring you to a page that breaks down frequently asked questions by subject. This includes a section specific to City Council discretionary funding that can be found toward the bottom of the page. The NYC Nonprofits website also offers valuable resources for nonprofit providers. NYC Nonprofits has various resources specific to nonprofits, including guides on how to contract in Passport and templates for certain contract documents. As for agency resources, most information is available on Bywise. Background information and resources related to City Council discretionary funding can be found in the Procurement tab, under Non-Competitive Procurement, in the City Council discretionary section. Guides include a list of the procedural requirements for award clearance, contracting tips, and the multi-year discretionary FAQ. Additionally, financial task guides specific to multi-year discretionary contracts can be found by first clicking Passport and selecting Financials. Next, click Certification of Funds and then select the Multi-Year Discretionary Award Contract section highlighted for more details on allocations and budgets. As a final summary, we have compiled a list of links to various guides, webinars, etc. that cover all elements of the discretionary process, organized by subject. All of these resources can be found across the 3 websites we just discussed. And now I'll hand it over to Noah to close us out.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our future programming. Have a wonderful day. Take care.